When kid with Tourette steps into the jewelry store, heart pounding with excitement, all that matters is buying a special gift for kid with Tourette's mother. But the moment shatters. Racist jewelry employee smirks, eyes full of judgment. Maybe try a department store, the words sting, humiliation sinking deep. What racist jewelry employee doesn't know? Big Shaq is watching. And when Big Shaq rises, unshaken and unforgiving, the store is about to witness a reckoning no one will ever forget. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. A bell jingles softly as the door swings open, letting in the bright midday sun. Inside Pemberton Jewelers, the air is cool, laced with the faint scent of polished wood and new money. Glass display cases stretch across the boutique, each one gleaming with expensive watches, diamond necklaces, and rings that could buy a house. It's the kind of place where silence is golden, where soft piano music plays in the background, and where people like Jordan aren't expected to walk in. Jordan, just 12 years old, steps inside with his mother, Denise. He has the awkward energy of a kid who knows he doesn't belong. His sneakers squeak on the marble floor as he looks around with wide, curious eyes. For weeks, he's been saving every penny, birthday money, odd jobs, even skipping snacks at school, to buy his mother a small but meaningful gift. Denise is a single mom, working double shifts at a diner, and Jordan knows she deserves more than she gets. Today is supposed to be special. Then it happens. A tick. A sudden jerking motion of his head, followed by a sharp, involuntary clicking sound from his mouth. It happens again. Jordan's body betrays him, just as it always does. His Tourette's is unpredictable, and the more anxious he gets, the more the tics take over. He tries to hold them back, but it's like trying to stop a sneeze. You can't. At the far end of the store, Raymond, a sharp-jawed employee with a stiff posture and an even stiffer attitude, notices him immediately. His thin lips pressed together in quiet disapproval. The store isn't exactly packed, just a few older couples browsing, a young man picking out an engagement ring. But Jordan, with his nervous energy and sudden twitches, draws attention like a stain on white silk. Raymond approaches with the forced politeness of someone trying to mask irritation. "Can I help you?" The words are crisp, clipped, the tone just shy of condescending. Denise, ever the optimist, smiles warmly. "Yes, my son's looking to buy something for me. It's a surprise." Jordan grins, his excitement momentarily overshadowing his nervousness. He fumbles with the wad of crumpled bills in his pocket, his small fortune of $73, and nods eagerly. "Something affordable but nice," he says. Then another tick. His arm jerks slightly, his shoulder lifts involuntarily, and his head twitches to the side. Raymond steps back like Jordan is contagious. His gaze hardens. Right. Something in his tone shifts. There's a subtle but unmistakable change in his posture, in his face. It's the look people give when they think they're better than you. The kind that says, "You don't belong here." He doesn't even bother hiding his disdain. His eyes flick over Jordan's sneakers, slightly scuffed but clean, then to Denise's simple attire. He assumes everything in that one glance. "I'm afraid we don't sell anything in that price range." Denise stiffens. "Oh, we just need something simple. Maybe a silver charm?" Raymond barely suppresses an exaggerated sigh. "As I said, nothing in that range." His voice is louder now, meant for others to hear. Jordan's fingers tighten around the money in his pocket. He knows what's happening. He's seen it before. At school, in grocery stores, in places where people like Raymond think they're the gatekeepers of what's acceptable. But Denise, always believing in the best of people, tries again. "Maybe a ring, a small one?" Raymond smirks. "Ma'am, maybe a department store would be more fitting." The words cut, hard. Jordan feels like the air has been knocked out of his chest. His tics intensify, his throat tightening as more clicking noises escape. Things he can't control, things he spent his whole life wishing away. And then, a deep, unmistakable voice speaks from the corner. "Is that how you treat all your customers?" The room shifts. Raymond turns, as do a few other shoppers. In the far end of the store, sitting casually in a leather chair, is a man so massive that his presence alone feels like gravity. Shaquille O'Neal. But not the larger-than-life TV personality. Not the basketball legend. Not the millionaire. Right now, he's just Big Shaq, the man who's been quietly watching everything unfold, and he does not look pleased. A stunned silence blankets the store. Raymond's confidence wavers, his lips parting slightly as if realizing too late that he's made a mistake. Shaq stands, slow and deliberate, his towering frame making even the high ceilings feel low. He doesn't rush. He doesn't need to. His presence alone does all the talking. Jordan's eyes go wide, recognition flashing across his face. But more than excitement, there's something else. A sense of relief. Like for the first time in a long time, someone sees him. Shaq steps forward, his voice calm but firm. Let me ask again. Is that how you treat all your customers? Raymond swallows, visibly nervous now. The once smug employee suddenly doesn't look so sure of himself. I was just saying, we don't have... Shaq cuts him off with nothing but a raised eyebrow. Raymond's throat bobs as he swallows hard. Shaq turns to Jordan, eyes kind but serious. What were you looking to buy, little man? Jordan hesitates. His tics are still there, but Shaq doesn't flinch. He doesn't look uncomfortable. He just waits, patient as ever. Finally, Jordan clears his throat. A necklace for my mom. Shaq nods. Then turning back to Raymond, he asks, You got necklaces, right? Raymond nods quickly, his face now a shade lighter. Then go get them, Shaq says, his voice level, unwavering. The store holds its breath. Raymond hesitates, clearly wanting to say something. But one look at Shaq's unblinking stare, and he's gone, disappearing into the back. Silence lingers. Everyone is watching. Jordan looks up at Shaq, his heart pounding in his chest. He wants to say something, to thank him, to tell him he's the coolest person on the planet. But he's still processing what just happened. Denise, on the other hand, finally exhales. I don't know how to thank you. Shaq waves a dismissive hand. Ain't about thanks. It's about what's right. The door at the back swings open. Raymond returns, now holding a velvet tray with multiple necklaces, ones he claimed didn't exist minutes ago. Shaq gestures toward the tray, looking at Jordan. Pick one. Jordan hesitates. He looks to his mom, then back to Shaq. But I only have... Shaq interrupts, smiling for the first time. I got the rest. Jordan's lips part in surprise. Denise's eyes mist over. And Raymond? He just stands there, knowing he lost more than just a sale today. Shaq places a gentle, massive hand on Jordan's shoulder. Now go ahead, little man. Pick something nice for your mom. And for the first time since he walked into the store, Jordan doesn't feel small anymore. The store feels tense. The air thickens, the kind of silence that presses against the walls, stretching the moment like a drawn-out breath before a storm. Raymond's grip on the velvet tray tightens as he sets it on the glass counter. He keeps his expression neutral, but his hands betray him, fingers stiff, shoulders squared a little too hard, like he's trying to keep control of a situation already slipping away. Shaq doesn't move right away. He lets the moment settle, lets the weight of his presence sink in. Jordan, still wide-eyed, barely breathes, clutching his crumpled bills in his pocket. His mother, Denise, shifts uneasily beside him. She knows better than anyone. Moments like this can turn ugly real fast. Shaq finally speaks. So let me get this straight. His voice rumbles, deep and even. You didn't have any necklaces for the kid, but when I asked, you found a whole tray? Raymond hesitates. He wants to deny it, to backpedal, but he knows it's useless now. The whole store has seen it. The truth is out there, hanging in the air, waiting to be addressed. I misunderstood the request, he says quickly. Shaq raises an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. Misunderstood? Yes, sir. Raymond nods stiffly, his posture straightening as he tries to regain authority. I assumed the young man was looking for something more budget-friendly. Shaq tilts his head slightly. Just a fraction. It's not aggressive, it's not hostile. But somehow it feels heavier than yelling ever could. Oh, Shaq says, dragging the word out. So it was about money? Raymond nods too quickly, as if grabbing onto the excuse like a lifeline. Yes, of course. Our store specializes in high-end pieces, and I didn't want to waste his time. Shaq exhales slowly, like he's watching someone dig their own grave and deciding whether or not to hand them a bigger shovel. He glances down at the tray, then up at the glass display cases behind Raymond. What's the most expensive piece you got in here? Raymond blinks. The shift in conversation throws him for a second. Excuse me? Most expensive piece, Shaq repeats, voice still casual, like he's asking for the weather. You got diamonds in here, right? Show me the biggest one. A pause. Then Raymond snaps back into salesman mode, relieved to change the subject. Of course, sir. He pivots, suddenly all smiles, moving with newfound energy. He steps toward a case near the back and unlocks it, pulling out a diamond-encrusted Cuban link chain that practically glows under the boutique, lighting. This piece here is one of our finest, Raymond says, his voice suddenly smooth, practiced. 18-karat white gold, VS1 clarity diamonds, handset. Goes for about $68,000. Shaq nods thoughtfully. 68,000? He lets the number linger before glancing at Jordan. What do you think, little man? Jordan startles, caught off guard. He isn't sure if Shaq is serious. He swallows hard, looking between the necklace and the former NBA giant beside him. It's really shiny? Shaq chuckles. Yeah, it is. Then he turns back to Raymond, eyes narrowing just slightly. You got any questions about my budget? The smile on Raymond's face flickers. No, sir, of course not. You sure? Shaq presses. You didn't stop to ask if I could afford it. Just went straight to the sale. Raymond freezes, the color draining from his face so subtly that only those really watching would notice. The other shoppers have gone quiet. No one is moving. No one is pretending not to listen anymore. Shaq doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't lean in. He just stands there, letting the hypocrisy settle. So what made you so sure about me? Shaq asks. Raymond doesn't answer. Shaq waits and waits. The moment stretches, thick and suffocating. Then Shaq chuckles, shaking his head. You know what's funny? You ain't the first person to pull something like this. I've seen it my whole life. Jordan watches him closely, sensing something deeper in his voice now. Something that isn't just about this store. Back when I was a kid, people like you didn't think I'd be anything either. Shaq continues, voice quieter now, but no less powerful. Didn't matter how much talent I had. Didn't matter how much money I made later. Still get followed in stores sometimes. Still get the side eye when I walk in certain places. He looks Raymond up and down. And now, here we are. Raymond shifts uncomfortably. He can feel it. The heat of being under a microscope. Of being the bad guy in a room full of witnesses. Let me ask you something, Raymond. Shaq leans against the counter, his massive forearms resting on the glass. You ever have a bad day? Raymond blinks, unsure where this is going. Excuse me? A bad day, Shaq repeats. You ever wake up and feel like the whole world is against you? Like no matter what you do, people are just waiting for you to fail? Raymond hesitates. He wants to say no. But something about the way Shaq is looking at him makes him reconsider. Yeah, I guess. Shaq nods. Imagine feeling that every time you walk into a room. Silence. Raymond looks away. Jordan watches, wide-eyed, like he's witnessing a battle without fists, a war fought with nothing but words and truth. Shaq straightens up. That kid right there? He nods toward Jordan. You made him feel small today. Made him feel like he wasn't good enough to even stand in this store. Raymond swallows hard. He looks at Jordan, who quickly looks away, pretending to focus on the necklaces. Shaq exhales, rubbing his chin. Then he reaches into his pocket, pulls out a thick roll of cash. He peels off 4 crisp $100 bills and places them on the glass counter. That should cover the necklace the kid wanted, he says, and a tip for the lesson you just learned. Raymond stares at the money, then back at Shaq. He doesn't reach for it, doesn't move. Shaq waits, challenges him with his silence. After a long pause, Raymond nods stiffly. His voice, when he finally speaks, is quiet. Understood. Shaq nods once, satisfied. Then, turning to Jordan, he smiles. Pick something out, little man. Jordan, still processing everything, finally steps forward. He hesitates, then points to a simple silver chain with a small heart pendant. That one, he says softly. Shaq smiles. Good choice. Raymond carefully places the necklace in a small velvet box, his movements mechanical, almost robotic. Shaq hands the box to Jordan himself. Give that to your mom with pride, okay? Jordan nods, his chest swelling in a way he's never felt before. As Shaq turns to leave, the entire store seems to breathe again. Conversations slowly pick up, customers murmuring amongst themselves, but everyone knows something shifted here today. Shaq doesn't look back. Jordan and Denise follow him toward the door, and just as they step outside into the bright daylight, Jordan looks up at the towering man beside him and whispers, "Thank you." Shaq just smiles down at him, ruffling his hair. "Anytime, little man." And with that, they walk into the sun, leaving behind a store that will never quite be the same again. The sun hangs high in the sky, but inside Pemberton Jewelers, the air still feels heavy. The tension from Shaq's intervention lingers like the fading echoes of a storm. Raymond, the store employee, hasn't spoken since Shaq put him in check, and the silence feels like punishment enough. Jordan clutches the velvet box in his hands, staring at it as if it holds more than just a necklace, as if it holds the weight of everything that just happened. His mother, Denise, stands beside him, trying to steady her breath. Shaq watches them both. Something in the boy's eyes pulls him back, way back. It starts as a whisper in his memory. Then suddenly, he's not here anymore. The world shifts. The pavement is cracked. The air is thick with the scent of hot asphalt and distant fryer grease from a burger joint down the block. A young Shaquille O'Neal, barely 11 years old, walks with his mother Lucille into a small department store. His feet are too big for his body. He's already taller than most grown men, but his face is still round with childhood. He just wants a new pair of sneakers. His last ones are worn out, soles barely holding on. Lucille holds his hand as they step inside. The store is dimly lit, cluttered with clothing racks and shelves stacked with shoeboxes. Behind the counter stands Mr. Thompson, a pale, wiry man in his 50s, with glasses perched at the tip of his nose. As soon as Shaq and his mother walk in, Thompson's eyes narrow. "Can I help you?" His voice is tight, not welcoming. Lucille smiles politely. "My son needs a new pair of shoes. Something sturdy." Thompson exhales sharply, his lips pressing together. He barely glances at Shaq before turning his attention back to a stack of receipts on the counter. "We don't got his size," he mutters. Lucille frowns. "You didn't even check." "Ain't got a check," Thompson replies, tapping the pen against the counter. "Ain't got nothing that'll fit his kind." The words hang in the air like the distant rumble of thunder. Shaq doesn't fully understand it yet, but he knows what just happened. The way his mother's grip tightens on his hand tells him enough. Lucille keeps her voice steady, but her body tenses. "Excuse me?" Thompson shrugs like it's not his problem. "Try somewhere else. Ain't no use causing trouble." Shaq feels a heat rise in his chest, a slow, burning anger he doesn't know what to do with yet. His mother is his world, and watching someone disrespect her like this makes something inside him ache. Lucille takes a breath, like she's about to say something sharp, but before she can, "Everything all right here?" The voice is deep, calm, commanding. From the far end of the store, a man steps forward. Coach Henderson, a towering black man in his late 40s, wearing a tracksuit with a whistle around his neck. He's a legend in the neighborhood, coaching the local basketball team. Shaq knows him well. Thompson shifts uncomfortably. "Just a misunderstanding," he says quickly. Coach Henderson doesn't blink. Didn't sound like it. For a long moment, it's just silence. Then, without breaking eye contact, Coach reaches behind the counter himself, grabbing a shoebox. He slams it on the counter, making Thompson flinch. "These the ones you said you didn't have?" he asks. Thompson says nothing. Coach Henderson slides the box toward Lucille and Shaq. "Try 'em on, big fella." Shaq hesitates, No one has ever stood up for him like this before. Lucille nods, gently urging him forward. With shaking hands, Shaq opens the box. The sneakers inside are perfect, clean, strong. They look like they could carry him somewhere far. Coach watches as Shaq slips them on. Fit? He asks. Shaq nods, too overwhelmed to speak. Coach claps him on the back. Good. You're gonna need him when you make the NBA one day. Shaq grins for the first time that day. Coach Henderson turns back to Thompson, his smile fading. Now, if you got a problem selling shoes to people like us, he says, voice like steel, you best put up a sign that says so. But if I ever hear about you treating another kid like this, we're gonna have a different kind of conversation. Thompson swallows hard, looking anywhere but at Coach. Lucille nods at Coach, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Shaq never forgets that moment. Not the shoes, not the shame, and not the feeling of someone standing up for him when he couldn't do it himself. Shaq blinks, snapping back to reality. The echoes of the past fade, but his chest still feels heavy. Jordan and Denise are watching him, confused by his silence. The boy still looks a little shaken, shoulders hunched like he's trying to disappear. Shaq exhales, running a hand over his bald head. He knows that look. He's worn it himself. Denise clears her throat, trying to ease the tension. We should go. Jordan nods quickly. He just wants to leave, to forget this ever happened. But Shaq isn't about to let that happen. Hold up, little man, he says. Jordan hesitates, looks up. Shaq kneels down so they're eye level. His voice softens. You ever play basketball? Jordan shrugs. Not really. Why not? Jordan hesitates. His throat bobs like he's swallowing something bitter. People don't really pick me for teams. Shaq nods slowly, understanding. Because of the Tourette's? Jordan shrugs again, but this time, his eyes start to glisten. Shaq studies him for a moment. Then he smiles. You ever hear what they said about me when I was your age? Jordan shakes his head. Said I was too big. Said I'd never be fast enough, never be good enough. Coaches didn't pick me either. Jordan frowns, confused. But you're Shaq. Shaq grins. I wasn't always Shaq, little man. Once upon a time, I was just a kid who didn't fit anywhere. Jordan meets his gaze now, truly listening. But you know what? I stopped listening to what they thought. Shaq taps Jordan's chest, right over his heart. Started listening to this instead. A beat of silence. Then, Jordan nods, just a little. Shaq smiles, standing up. Tell you what, you ever want to learn how to hoop, you come find me. Jordan's eyes widen. Denise looks stunned. Wait, you're serious? Shaq shrugs. Got a gym. Got time. Just say the word. For the first time since stepping into that store, Jordan smiles. It's small, but it's real. Shaq claps him gently on the back. Come on, little man, let's get out of here. And as they step into the sun, Shaq knows one thing for sure. He was once that kid. And today, he got to be someone's Coach Henderson. The air inside Pemberton Jewelers is still heavy, thick with the weight of what just happened. The world outside is bright and bustling, but inside these walls a quiet war is unfolding. Shaq stands firm, towering over the counter, his massive frame unmoving. His voice never rises, never wavers, but the energy in the room has shifted. Raymond, the jewelry store employee, stands stiffly behind the counter, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the glass edge a little too hard. His confidence is cracking, small fractures in his once smug demeanor. He knows. He knows he lost control of the situation the moment he underestimated Shaquille O'Neal. Jordan clutches the velvet box containing his mother's necklace, his fingers tightening around it like it's the most valuable thing in the world. Denise, his mother, watches the tension unfold with cautious eyes, her protective instincts ready to step in. The store is eerily quiet. Other customers pretend to browse, but their ears are tuned in. No one dares to look too obvious, but everyone is watching. Then, the sound of polished shoes clicking against the floor cuts through the silence. A door swings open near the back of the store. A tall, middle-aged man in a tailored navy blue suit steps out. Gerald Langston, the store's manager. Unlike Raymond, Gerald carries himself with ease, the kind of man who's used to walking into a room and expecting immediate respect. His salt and pepper hair is neatly combed back, his gold nameplate gleaming under the chandelier lights. He surveys the scene quickly. His sharp eyes land on Raymond, then flick to Shaq, and just for a second, just a flicker, there's recognition. But instead of stepping in to fix the situation, Gerald's lips press into a thin, knowing smile. Is there a problem here? His voice is smooth, practiced. Shaq doesn't answer immediately. He lets the weight of the moment breathe, lets the question hang in the air like a slow-building storm. It's Raymond who speaks first, his voice tight with desperation. This gentleman here was unhappy with our service. Gerald raises an eyebrow. Gentlemen, Raymond stammers, realizing how quickly he's switching tones. Shaq chuckles under his breath. Service, that's what we're calling it now? Gerald clasps his hands together in front of him, exuding the confidence of a man who believes he's untouchable. We run a highly exclusive establishment, sir. We cater to a certain clientele. There it is, the quiet insult, the coded language. Shaq tilts his head slightly, studying Gerald the way a lion studies prey. He doesn't blink. Denise stiffens. Jordan swallows hard. He might not understand the full weight of what's being said, but he feels it. Shaq exhales slowly. So let me see if I got this straight, he says. This young man comes in here, ready to spend his hard-earned money, and gets treated like he don't belong. Meanwhile, I ask for the most expensive thing you got, and suddenly it's red carpet treatment. Gerald smiles, but it doesn't reach his eyes. We have policies, sir. Shaq nods, slow, calculated. Policies. He lets the word roll off his tongue, tastes it. Raymond, sensing an opportunity, jumps in. Of course. We have standards, and we have to ensure our products go to... Shaq cuts him off with nothing but a look. Raymond closes his mouth. Shaq takes a deep breath, his presence filling the room even more. You ever hear of a guy named Coach Henderson? Gerald blinks, thrown off. Excuse me? Coach Henderson, Shaq repeats, used to say, ain't about how you start, it's about how you finish. Gerald shifts, clearly uncomfortable now. See, I started just like this kid right here, Shaq continues, nodding toward Jordan. Getting looked at sideways, getting shut out of places like this. People telling me I don't belong. His voice is steady, but there's fire beneath it. Then I grew up, grew bigger, played a little ball, made a little money. And now, suddenly, the same people that once looked down on me want to shake my hand, want to smile in my face. The room is silent. Gerald knows. He knows exactly who he's talking to, but he refuses to acknowledge it. Not yet. Shaq leans forward slightly, resting his massive forearms on the glass counter. Tell me something, Gerald. The use of his first name makes the manager flinch. If I walked in here dressed a little different, if I wasn't who I am, would you have treated me the same way you treated that kid? Gerald tries to keep his composure. Of course, we treat every customer with... Shaq holds up a hand, stopping him. Don't do that. His voice is quiet, controlled, but it demands attention. Don't stand there and lie to me in front of all these people. A few customers shift. Some are now whispering. And then, finally, recognition spreads through the store. A woman near the engagement rings gasps quietly. Wait, that's Shaquille O'Neal. A man near the watches nudges his friend. Dude, that's Shaq. The whispers grow. A ripple effect. And just like that, the balance shifts. Raymond's confidence shatters completely. His face loses color, his posture rigid. Gerald's fake composure is crumbling at the edges. His mind is racing. He knows he messed up. Shaq watches the panic settle in. The realization, the regret, and finally, the fear. He lets it sit, lets them drown in it for a moment. Then he leans back and exhales. Man, y'all had no idea, did you? Gerald forces a smile. Of course we... Shaq waves a hand. Don't. It's too late for all that. Gerald swallows hard. Shaq lets his gaze sweep across the store. I want y'all to remember this moment. Raymond and Gerald both freeze. Remember how quick you were to judge this kid. Remember how easy it was to dismiss him. 'Cause I guarantee you today's the last time you'll ever get away with it. A heavy beat of silence. Then, Shaq turns to Jordan. You ready to go, little man? Jordan, still clutching the necklace, nods. Denise looks between Shaq and the two men, then finally speaks. Her voice is steady. You should be ashamed of yourselves. She doesn't say it loud. She doesn't need to, because the shame is already there. Shaq nods toward the door. Jordan and Denise step toward it. Shaq follows, never looking back. But before he exits, he pauses, turns his head just slightly. Oh, and Gerald? Gerald stiffens. Shaq grins. That diamond chain you were bragging about? I wouldn't take it if you paid me. And with that, Shaquille O'Neal walks out of Pemberton Jewelers, leaving behind a lesson those men will never forget. The afternoon sun blazes overhead as Shaq steps out of Pemberton Jewelers, the heavy glass door swinging shut behind him. The world outside is bright and alive, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension he just left behind. Denise and Jordan follow closely. The boy is still gripping the small velvet box, holding it like it's the most valuable thing he's ever owned. His expression is hard to read, somewhere between excitement and exhaustion. Shaq glances down at him. You hungry, little man? Jordan hesitates, glancing at his mom. Denise chuckles softly, shaking her head. If you're offering, I won't let him say no, she says. Shaq grins. Good, 'cause I know a spot. The black SUV glides smoothly through the streets of downtown. Jordan's head is pressed against the window, watching as the buildings blur past. This part of the city looks different, bigger, shinier, cleaner. There are no cracked sidewalks here, no rundown buildings. Where are we going? Jordan finally asks. Shaq glances at him from the driver's seat. Somewhere that'll make you forget about all that mess back there. Denise watches Shaq carefully. She knows what he's doing. This isn't about expensive food or fancy places. It's about giving her son a moment to feel normal. A moment where he isn't being judged. A moment where he isn't the kid with Tourette's. The SUV pulls up in front of Carmichael's, a high-end burger joint with floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek decor, and an undeniable aura of wealth. Jordan hesitates as Shaq opens the door for him. This place feels too nice, too expensive. We can just go to McDonald's, Jordan mumbles. Shaq laughs, a deep rumbling sound. Nah, little man, today you eat like a king. Healing, one bite at a time. Inside, the restaurant pauses when Shaq walks in. People turn, heads lift. A few whispers ripple through the crowd. Is that? No way, that's Shaq. Jordan shifts uncomfortably. He's not used to this kind of attention. But Shaq? Shaq walks in like he owns the place. He greets the hostess with an easy grin, and within moments they're led to a corner booth, one of the best seats in the house. Denise glances at the menu and raises an eyebrow at the prices. $18 for a burger. Shaq smirks. Worth every penny. Jordan, still unsure if this is real life, leans forward. What's the best thing here? Shaq taps the menu. Get the Shaq special. Trust me. The kid's eyes widen. You got a burger named after you? Shaq grins. When you're this big, people name food after you. The tension from earlier? It starts to fade. They eat. They laugh. And for the first time all day, Jordan isn't thinking about what happened at the jewelry store. But outside of this little bubble, the world is catching fire. Someone inside Pemberton Jewelers recorded everything. The video is already online, and it's spreading fast. The headline is brutal. Racist jewelry store employee humiliates disabled kid. Until Shaq steps in. The footage is crisp, clear, and impossible to ignore. It captures everything. The way Raymond dismissed Jordan, the way he suddenly changed when Shaq asked for the most expensive item, and the moment Shaq exposed his hypocrisy in front of the whole store. By the time Shaq is halfway through his burger, the video has racked up millions of views. People are furious. On Twitter, that jewelry store just ended their own business. You don't mess with Shaq. That poor kid. You could see the moment his heart broke. This is why racism is still a problem. I hope that store gets shut down. That employee? Done. On Instagram, Celebrities are reposting the video. Athletes, actors, activists, they're all talking about it. People are tagging the store nonstop, demanding an apology, calling for boycotts. Comments flood Pemberton Jewelers' official page, thousands of angry voices calling them out. And in the midst of it all, Shaq stays completely silent. Shaq's phone buzzes. Denise and Jordan are still eating, so he casually glances at the screen. Dozens of missed calls. Reporters, talk show producers, news stations. Everyone wants a statement. Shaq smirks to himself and puts his phone on silent. Because right now, he's letting the world speak first. While Shaq enjoys his meal, the jewelry store is falling apart. By the end of the day, Pemberton Jewelers disables their Instagram comments. Raymond's name is trending, for the wrong reasons. People are digging up his past, finding old complaints from other customers who had similar experiences. The store's Yelp page gets flooded with one-star reviews. Customers start canceling orders. And then, it gets worse. By nightfall, a former employee speaks out. She posts a long thread on Twitter. I used to work at Pemberton Jewelers. Raymond has always been like this. I saw him refuse service to black customers. I saw him treat disabled people like trash. No one did anything because Gerald, the manager, always covered for him. The post explodes. Shaq sees it. He expected this. As they step out of the restaurant, Jordan wipes his mouth and looks up at Shaq. Are you gonna say anything? Shaq shrugs. Don't need to. But they're calling you a hero. Shaq sighs, kneeling down so he's eye level with Jordan. I didn't do it to be a hero, little man. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Jordan thinks about that for a moment, then nods. They walk down the street together, full from their meal, as the world keeps buzzing in the background. And as they move through the city, Shaq looks around, wondering if anything really changes, or if this is just another battle in a war that never ends. The city moves at its usual pace, but inside a quiet hotel suite, Shaq watches the world react in real time. The video from Pemberton Jewelers has exploded. Every major news outlet is running the story. Social media is on fire. Yet, despite the storm outside, Shaq is calm. He's seen this before. A controversy, a viral moment, public outrage. But what happens after? That's the real test. And right now, the people who caused this mess are scrambling. Shaq's phone vibrates. The screen flashes with a name he doesn't recognize, but he already knows who it is. He answers, doesn't say a word, just waits. A slick, carefully controlled voice comes through the line. Mr. O'Neal, this is Daniel Whitmore, CEO of Pemberton Jewelers. I assume you know why I'm calling. Shaq leans back on the couch, one massive hand resting on his knee. You tell me. There's a pause, just a fraction of hesitation before the CEO switches into damage control mode. First, let me apologize for the unfortunate experience you and that young man had in our store. We take these matters very seriously. This is not who we are as a company. Shaq exhales slowly. Here we go. That right? He says. Absolutely. We deeply regret what happened. The employee involved has been dealt with. Shaq smirks. Fired him already? We handled it internally. Whitmore corrects quickly. I just wanted to reach out personally and assure you that we're committed to making this right. Shaq is silent for a moment, letting the man feel the weight of the pause. So what's your plan? Excuse me? Your plan, Shaq repeats. 'Cause from where I'm sitting, this just sounds like you trying to sweep things under the rug. Whitmore clears his throat. We're prepared to issue a public statement condemning discrimination. We'll also be donating to a charity of your choice. Shaq chuckles. He's heard this play before. A PR move. A check written to make the problem disappear. Let me ask you something, Danny. Whitmore stiffens at the use of his first name. Go ahead. You knew about Raymond, didn't you? Another hesitation. Then, I can't say I was familiar with... Come on, man. Shaq cuts him off, his voice still low, still calm, but sharper now. I ain't stupid. You knew. Your manager knew. Raymond's been pulling this for years and y'all let it slide because it didn't cost you nothing. Mr. O'Neal, I assure you. Nah, don't assure me. Assure that kid you humiliated. Assure every person that walked into your store and got treated like they were less than... Whitmore falls silent. Shaq leans forward. his voice dropping lower. Y'all are only sorry 'cause you got caught. Whitmore clears his throat again, trying to regain control of the conversation. What exactly are you asking for, Mr. O'Neal? Shaq thinks for a second. Then, he lays it out. You want this to go away? Then don't just throw money at the problem. Change the way you do business. Meaning? Publicly acknowledge what happened. Own up to it. And not just that, start hiring practices that reflect the real world. You say you're against discrimination? Prove it. Get diversity training. Start hiring more people of color. Give people a real shot. Whitmore's mask cracks, just slightly. That's quite a demand, he says. Nah, Shaq replies. That's the bare minimum. A long silence. Then the CEO exhales, and when he speaks again, the politeness is gone. Listen, Mr. O'Neal, Whitmore says, his voice cooling. I appreciate your passion, but let's be realistic. We're a luxury brand. Our clientele expects a certain standard. Shaq's eyes darken. A certain standard? You know what I mean, Whitmore says dismissively. We serve an exclusive market. People expect a certain level of service and discretion. This push for diversity? It doesn't exactly align with our brand image. Shaq lets the words settle. And now? He knows exactly who he's dealing with. Appreciate the honesty, Danny, Shaq finally says. Whitmore, thinking he's won, exhales. So let's be reasonable. We can handle this quietly. No need for further. Nah, Shaq interrupts. Whitmore pauses. Nah? Shaq smiles, but there's no warmth in it. You just made this real easy for me. And then, he hangs up. The second Shaq ends the call, he knows what comes next. Because Whitmore's arrogance, that just lit a fire. Shaq doesn't need to say much. The world is already talking. Celebrities start weighing in. Big names in sports, music, and Hollywood start reposting the video, demanding accountability. Influencers call for a full boycott. People flood the comments of Pemberton Jewelers' social media, tagging brands, demanding answers. News networks start digging deeper. Reporters uncover past complaints against Pemberton Jewelers, stories of racial profiling, unfair hiring practices, and discrimination. Protests spark outside Pemberton locations. People show up with signs, chanting, refusing to let the story die. This is no longer just about Jordan. This is about every person who's ever been made to feel invisible. The pressure builds. Shaq's phone buzzes nonstop. Talk show hosts, journalists, even politicians are starting to comment. Pemberton Jewelers is losing control. And Whitmore? He finally realizes just how bad this is. 2 days later, another call comes in. Shaq lets it ring twice before answering. Whitmore's voice is tighter this time. Mr. O'Neal, let's talk. Shaq leans back, satisfied. That's what I thought. Whitmore exhales. We're willing to discuss some of your requests. Shaq smirks. That's cute. But see now, you don't get to negotiate. You either do what's right or you watch your company burn. Another long pause. Then, finally, the sound of a man realizing he's lost. Fine, Whitmore mutters. We'll make the changes. Shaq lets that sit for a moment before responding. Good. And next time? Try doing the right thing before the whole world forces you to. And with that, he hangs up again. Later that night, Pemberton Jewelers issues a public statement. They announce mandatory diversity training for all employees, a new hiring initiative focusing on inclusivity, a personal apology to Jordan and his family. It's not perfect, but it's a start. And for Shaq, that's enough. For now. Because the battle might be over. But the war? It never really ends. The war should have been over. Pemberton Jewelers had issued their public apology. They promised changes. The CEO had been forced into a corner, forced to say the right things, even if they didn't come from the heart. To the outside world, it looked like a victory. Justice had been served. But Shaq knew better. Because real change? That doesn't happen in a single press release. And something about all of this still felt unfinished. Shaq was in his home office when the message came in. An email. No subject line. No sender name he recognized. just a simple message. You don't know the half of it. Attached was a phone number. Shaq stared at the screen for a moment, his gut telling him this wasn't just some random tip. This was something bigger. He picked up his phone and dialed. A woman answered. Her voice was cautious, hesitant. Is this really Shaquille O'Neal? Depends, Shaq said. Who's asking? A beat of silence. Then, my name is Alicia. I used to work at Pemberton Jewelers, and I need to tell you the truth. The next day, Shaq met Alicia in a quiet cafe on the other side of the city. She was in her early 30s, sharp eyes, tense posture, the kind of person who had spent years carrying a weight too heavy for one person alone. She wasted no time. Raymond, she said. He's just the tip of the iceberg. She pulled out a worn leather notebook, flipping through pages filled with notes, dates, incidents. I worked there for 6 years, Alicia said. I saw things. I experienced things. Black customers being ignored, followed, falsely accused of trying to steal. Employees of color being passed over for promotions, while white employees with half their experience got raises. The worst part, she exhaled. Corporate knew, and they didn't care. Shaq's jaw tightened. You got proof? He asked. Alicia nodded. Plenty. She slid a flash drive across the table. Emails, internal reports, complaints that were buried. Her voice dropped lower. They have a system, Shaq. They categorize high-risk customers. You know what that means? Shaq already knew, but he let her say it. Black and brown shoppers, young customers, disabled customers. Her hands balled into fists. People like Jordan. Shaq stared at the flash drive, his mind racing. This wasn't just about one bad employee. This was company policy. And now, he had the proof. Shaq didn't go to the media immediately. He didn't need to, because when the truth is this big, all you have to do is let it breathe. Alicia leaked the emails herself, anonymously. The internet did the rest. Within hours, the leaked documents were everywhere. Internal memos exposing racist training practices. Records of complaints from employees of color, ignored or dismissed. Secret security policies that instructed staff to monitor certain customers. The hashtag number sign, Boycott Pemberton, exploded. This wasn't just about one store anymore. It was about an industry. By the next morning, the fallout had reached new levels. Civil rights organizations got involved. Activists were demanding investigations into other high-end retailers with similar histories. Lawyers started circling. Former employees, customers, everyone who had ever been mistreated saw an opportunity to fight back. Pemberton Jewelers' stock plummeted. Investors started pulling out. Board members were panicking. And at the center of it all, Daniel Whitmore, the once powerful CEO who thought he could smooth talk his way out of this. Now, he was drowning. The final blow came on a Monday morning. A federal investigation was announced. Pemberton Jewelers was being sued for discriminatory practices and civil rights violations. Shaq watched the news from his living room, arms crossed over his chest. He knew Whitmore would eventually call again, and he did. But this time, Shaq let it go to voicemail. Some lessons? You gotta learn the hard way. But the best part of this story? It wasn't about Whitmore. It wasn't about Pemberton Jewelers. It was about Jordan. Because while the world was focused on the scandal, something else had happened. The kid who once shrunk into himself, afraid to be seen, was now standing in front of an entire crowd. A local youth center had invited him to speak. Shaq had pulled a few strings to make it happen, but the moment belonged to Jordan alone. He stood on a small stage, microphone in hand, nervous at first. But then, he looked out at the crowd and found his courage. People used to tell me to stay quiet, he said. That if I didn't make noise, maybe I wouldn't get noticed. Maybe I wouldn't get picked on. He swallowed hard. Shaq watched from the side, his chest swelling with pride. But I don't want to be quiet anymore. The audience leaned in. Because I learned something. Jordan's voice grew stronger. The problem isn't me. It's the way people see me. And if I don't speak up, nothing's ever going to change. The room erupted in applause. And Shaq, he just smiled. Because in the end, This wasn't just about taking down a bad company. It was about raising up the ones who deserved to be heard. And as Jordan stepped off that stage, confidence in his step, Shaq knew one thing for certain. That kid was never going to shrink himself again. The storm had done its damage. Pemberton Jewelers, once a symbol of wealth and exclusivity, was now a cautionary tale. The lawsuits were piling up. Investors had fled. The media had turned the company into the poster child for systemic discrimination. And Daniel Whitmore? The once powerful CEO was out of options. The meeting was set for noon. Whitmore had requested it. Begged for it, actually. Shaq didn't rush. He let the man sit in his own mess for a few days. Let him feel what it was like to have the world against him. Now, as he stepped into the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Pemberton's corporate office, he saw it right away. The cracks in Whitmore's armor. The man was thinner than before, his tailored suit hanging a little loose. His hair, usually slicked back with precision, was slightly out of place. But the biggest tell? His eyes. They weren't sharp anymore. They were tired. Shaq took a seat across from him, his massive frame dwarfing the high-backed chair. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Mr. O'Neal, I appreciate you coming in today." Shaq didn't respond. He just leaned back, waiting. Whitmore shifted, adjusting his cuffs. "Look, let's be honest. This situation has gotten out of hand. Mistakes were made, but we want to fix it." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Whitmore forced a chuckle, but it was hollow. "Of course. That's why I called this meeting. We're prepared to make changes." Shaq nodded slowly. "Here we go." "Let me guess," he said. "You want to make a donation. Maybe start a little awareness campaign. Something that looks good in a press release but don't actually fix nothing." Whitmore hesitated. Just a second too long. Shaq smiled. "Yeah, that's what I thought." The CEO straightened. "What exactly do you want, Mr. O'Neal?" Shaq folded his hands on the table. "I don't want an apology." Whitmore blinked. "I don't want a check." Now the CEO looked confused. "I want change." Shaq leaned in, his voice low but firm. "Here's what's gonna happen." Whitmore swallowed. "First, you're gonna acknowledge the truth." Shaq's gaze was unwavering. Not some half-baked statement full of legal jargon. A real apology. One that says you knew what was happening inside this company, and you let it slide. Whitmore tensed. He started to speak, but Shaq cut him off. "Second, you're gonna put your money where your mouth is. I want a real investment, millions, not thousands, into programs for disabled kids. For kids like Jordan. Kids that get looked at sideways just for existing." Whitmore's face paled. "Third," Shaq continued, "you're gonna change the way you hire. No more gatekeeping, no more certain clientele nonsense. I want real diversity in your stores, top to bottom." A heavy silence settled over the room. Whitmore exhaled sharply. "That's a lot." Shaq nodded. "Yeah, it is. Resistance and collapse." The CEO shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I understand where you're coming from," he started. "But you have to realize, our clientele expects a certain atmosphere. We can't just—" Shaq held up a hand, stopping him. "Danny." Whitmore flinched at the name. "You still think you got a choice here?" The man hesitated. "You don't." Shaq leaned forward, voice calm but final. "If you don't do this, your company is done." Whitmore swallowed hard. He knew it too. The lawsuits were getting worse. The protests weren't stopping. Customers had walked away, and once luxury brands lose exclusivity, they never get it back. His empire was already collapsing. Shaq let that reality sink in. "So," he said, giving him one last chance, "you gonna fix what you broke, or you gonna let it burn?" A long silence. Then, Whitmore slumped in his chair. "Fine." His voice was hollow. "We'll do it." Shaq nodded once. Smart choice. A week later, the announcement came. Pemberton Jewelers issued a full public apology, not just for the Jordan incident, but for years of discrimination. They pledged $10 million to organizations supporting disabled and underprivileged youth. They launched a company-wide overhaul of their hiring practices, bringing in independent auditors to ensure change was real. They started recruiting from diverse communities, opening doors that had been closed for decades. It wasn't just damage control, it was a complete transformation. And for the first time, people actually started to believe it. But for Shaq, the real win wasn't in corporate boardrooms. It was in a small community gym where Jordan stood at the free throw line, ball in hand. His posture was different now, shoulders back, head high. Shaq watched from the sidelines, arms crossed as the kid dribbled. "All right, little man," he called. "Show me what you got." Jordan took a breath. Shot the ball. Swish. A perfect shot. Jordan's face lit up. Shaq grinned. "See? Told you. You just had to stop listening to the wrong people." Jordan jogged over, his smile wide. "Hey, Shaq?" "Yeah? Did we win?" Shaq thought about it for a second. Then he smiled. "Not yet, little man." He nodded toward the court. "Now go run it back." Because the fight for change, it never really ends. The world keeps moving. Months pass. The headlines shift. New scandals emerge. New viral stories take over. But some things, the important things, leave a lasting mark. Pemberton Jewelers, once a name synonymous with elitism and quiet discrimination, now stands as an example of what happens when a company is forced to evolve. It's under new ownership now. Whitmore was forced out, his legacy erased. The new CEO, a woman of color, a former executive who had spent years fighting for inclusion in luxury spaces. Under her leadership, hiring practices change. More diverse employees. More inclusivity. A new community outreach program is launched. Scholarships for underprivileged youth. Internships for kids who never thought they'd have access to this world. Jordan is invited to the grand reopening. He almost didn't go. Jordan, now a little taller, a little stronger, still isn't sure he belongs in a place like this. But Shaq makes sure he walks through those doors with his head held high. Jordan stands in front of a packed crowd, microphones and cameras in his face. He grips the edges of the podium, his heart hammering. Then he speaks. "A few months ago, I walked into a store like this, and someone told me, without saying it outright, that I didn't belong." The room goes silent. They saw my Tourette's, they saw my skin, and they judged me before I even said a word. He takes a deep breath. His hands shake a little. But then, he looks at Shaq. And just like that, he finds his strength. "I used to believe people when they told me to be quiet, that if I didn't draw attention to myself, I wouldn't have to deal with people treating me differently." A pause. "But I don't believe that anymore." Shaq smiles from the crowd. "Because I learned that my voice matters. And no one gets to decide where I belong except me." The audience erupts into applause. And Jordan, he doesn't shrink from it. He stands tall. The work is done. For now. Shaq watches Jordan shake hands with reporters, his confidence radiating in a way it never had before. Denise wipes a tear from her eye, beaming at her son. Shaq could stay, could take a bow, accept the thanks, bask in the victory. But that's not who he is. Because this was just one battle. And the fight against discrimination? It never really ends. A few days later, Shaq walks into a small clothing boutique, a place he's never been before. No cameras, no fanfare, just him, alone. As he browses, his ears pick up a conversation near the register. A young woman, nervous, hesitant, trying to return something. The employee behind the counter is stone-faced, dismissive. "Sorry, we can't do refunds on worn items." "But I haven't worn it." That's what they all say. The words are casual, offhanded, but Shaq knows that tone. He watches the girl's shoulders sink, the way she looks around, debating whether to fight or just walk away. And that's when Shaq steps forward. "Something wrong here?" The employee looks up and freezes. Shaq doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. Because sometimes, all it takes is being seen. The final message. The fight isn't over. It never will be. But as long as there are people willing to stand up, speak out, and refuse to let injustice slide, there's hope. And Shaquille O'Neal? He's going to keep making sure that no one fights alone. Injustice isn't always loud. It often hides in plain sight. But the real question is, when you see it, what will you do? Moments like these don't just belong in stories. They happen every day, in front of people who choose to look away. Next time, be the one who steps forward. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to change everything.